with Linda. Thank you so much for hopping on. How are you today?
I am well, thank you.
You've now written 15 books, and I want to understand your writing process a little bit because you've stated that you write with soul, and I want to know exactly what that means to you, and what your writing process is, and what your inspiration was for your first series.
Aha. Okay, sure. So there's several pieces to that question. So I'll take the, so when I say the books have soul, what I mean by that is there's vulnerability, there's intimacy, and there's like characters are real. Okay. So what I mean by that is in every one of my books, I always put my characters in situations where their backs are up against the wall, and it's not an easy, I've forgotten, it's that term like God comes in and saves the day, kind of, whatever. So none of my books have that, right? It's like they have to figure it out themselves. Anyway, and in the process of that, there's a lot of soul searching many times. I have a series of 7 books that's middle grade / young adult. And then I have 2 other series that are upstream that I went to new adult, right? So middle grade, young adult obviously doesn't have any intimate, it's not romantic, right? As opposed to the new adult, obviously there's a lot more steam, I guess you could call it. So with each type of series, there's a different kind of intimacy. So for instance, like in the upper new adult, you're going to find intimacy in terms of between male and female kind of a thing, right? So more the romantic side. In the middle grade young adult, where you find intimacy in reality is, so for instance, my hero, Andy, he's put through a lot of different trials. And I mean, at one point, both his parents die, so there's the intimacy there of dealing and coping with death even. Or at one point, another one of his friends dies. And so it's like dealing with the death of a friend at your, same age kind of a thing. So, I mean, it's different ways of exploring intimacy and just having your characters being really real in a way that readers can identify with, if that makes sense.
I'm very curious because obviously that is putting soul in it is massively influenced by character development and outside circumstances. Another element I want to question too, because of the genres that you write, and sometimes some people really struggle with it, which I highly doubt you do because you have achieved so many things and you have so many raving reviews. I stalked you a little bit. I want to talk about world building a little bit too. A lot of people do attempt to write fantasy, but they don't stick to their own rules in what that world is and what they've developed and how to properly communicate with the reader what this world is looking like. When you create a world, how do you stick to your rules that you've created?
So I'm always asking myself, okay, how would this character interact with the world? Like, what are, as you say, what are the rules that you establish, and do those rules, how will the character have to cope with those rules in that scenario, right? So I'll give you an example. The current series I'm writing is called God of Secrets, and there's what's called secret magic, okay? The scenario is this: with secret magic, it's put forth that secret magic, it allows secrets to be sealed, which allow, for instance, like politicians or people with power to seal secrets and hence not get caught in their misdeeds, okay, to live above the law, okay? So, I mean, I'm always having to think about what is the situation, what is the particular scene, what is the character doing, and then how are they going to relate to secret magic.
I love that. It's so fascinating because that is a very difficult element to apply in your manuscript. And I can relate to that personally because in one of my series, the main character, she's a very headstrong woman, but she lacks in emotion and empathy. However, when she's with her familiar, so her soulmate, her partner, her everything, she has that. So she's overwhelmed by trying to understand it. And so I found it very interesting. In every situation, I had to think about how to apply this, where she comes off as very arrogant, and I'm like, to some people she may not be likable, but that's true to her character and her circumstances, because she's very matter of fact, it has to be this way. And then it's like a roller coaster when she's with a partner because she can't handle it. So it's kind of whiplash to write, but it's very interesting to apply an element such as what you've applied as well, because it's very tricky for the writer to do that well.
Well, the other thing that's you always have to think about is, so in a case like secret magic, so God of Secrets, this secret magic is a large piece of what readers are expecting. So you're always needing to find ways you can weave it in to a situation so that what the reader's expectation when they come to read a book, they're not disappointed because, well, you started out great, but then not heard one thing about secret magic ever again, right? It's like, oh, and then it gets picked up in the last 5 chapters. They always want, especially when it has to do with a type of magic, readers always want to see it in play. They want to see it used, right? It's like, how are characters using it?
I'm very curious to hear about the start of your writing career and how that came about. What made you decide, I want to be a writer and I'm going to start this series? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I was 8 years old when I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And I remember thinking at that age, you have random thoughts, right? I remember thinking, this is really cool. I want to write something like this when I get older. Because Narnia, so Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's got 3 plot layers, at least as I look at it. So it's got Narnia, it's got London, and then there is this, what I call a meaning layer that undergirds the entire thing. So I don't know how much you know about C.S. Lewis, but he had a certain faith, right? And so woven throughout this whole book is that story. What spurred me to be able to write my first book is that I had owned a company. I had a partner, and the tech bubble burst, and we decided, you know what, we're going to go sideways for a really, really long time while everything, recovers. And we're like, you know what, we are so not excited about going sideways. Going sideways meaning your revenue's not going to grow. You're just going to keep grinding through stuff. It's like, no, we're after growth. So I sold my company to a competitor. And so it's like, great, now what do I want to do, right? And I'm like, I've always wanted to write this book. Well, so I had at the time in mind one children's book. That's all I had, since I was 8 years old, I just like one book, one kid's book, right? That borrowed kind of like the Narnia and stuff, only mine has 4 layers. There's a meaning layer. There's a place called Umaldi. There is Texas. And then there's also a layer, basically there are a lot of lessons in this story. So for instance, coping with fear, how to overcome, the fear, the anxiety, that, there's all sorts of lessons, life lessons in, or another one is responsibility, diligence, various values that I think most parents want their kids to embody. So, but it's done in a way, it's not like I'm going to clobber the kid over the head, right? It's like, no, the character goes through various things and he has to cope with it, right? It's like he has to deal with fear or whatever, anyway. So when I've had the opportunity to start that, I'm like, gee, okay, so this is the first book I will have ever written, and I kind of wanted to have, what would I say? And a rough outline that I knew worked and that the general public loved already, and that would be called Harry Potter. Okay, so there's no magic in mine, but basically I studied how J K Rowling constructed her 7-book series. That's why there's 7 books in this series. Okay, and I looked at, okay, so the first 3 books were setting it up. Book 4 was very pivotal. That's when Voldemort really gets a lot darker. Then the other 3 books are basically Voldemort takes control all the way through Harry Potter defeating Voldemort. I studied how she developed her plots for each of these books. Why not use something that I know is going to work?
I absolutely love that, because I think a lot of people, obviously you wrote to what your passion was and to where your muse was, which was this particular series. But I very much appreciate that you were able to be smart about it, like in your approach towards it, in your research towards it, because I know, like, personally, I kind of just threw myself straight into it, like started writing and went for it because, I was like, oh, I love Cassandra Clare's books and I love this, let's give it a go. But that's so clever, and that comes out too in one of the things I loved about looking at your books was the way that they're set up. So, for example, when you go onto Amazon and you look at your blurb, for example, it's a very clear copyright, beautiful blurb, and then underneath you have, for lovers who love Sarah J. Maas, who love this author, who love that author. You're very specific because you know your market. And the reason why you know your market, I'm assuming, is because you know who you were intending to write these books for. For example, this series, you're intending to write for the exact same age group who are trying to find a connection with it because, they've just come off this roller coaster, such as J K Rowling, and they're looking for their next read. And you already had that in mind before you started writing.
So I think, like a lot of people, when you want to write your first book, you're just you don't know where to start. And I just knew, so I read Harry Potter as an adult.
Yep.
Like, my daughter devoured these books, and she's at the age, so she's 27 now, right? But she was the target market when they were coming out. So yeah, I mean, in terms of a place to start, I was just looking for a place to start, and considering it was the same target market that I was after, I was looking for what established, well-accepted series can I maybe use as a guideline.
What was your experience? So you started writing this book with the intention of publishing it. How long did it take you to write your book, and what was the process like for you in terms of independently publishing?
Yeah, so the first book took me a year to write.
Okay.
And I would say there was a lot of trial and error. When I finished writing the first book, I was stupid enough to believe that I didn't need to get a professional editor. And so I didn't. And I actually published the thing without a professional editor having gone through it. And let me assure you that the first sets of reviews were pretty uniform in, like, if you actually go to Blast of the Dragon's Fury and you sort chronologically, you'll see that the first probably 50 reviews on that first book were like, could have used a good editor. All these, it's like punctuation, whatever. Anyway, so what I did at that point was, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not stupid. I hired an editor and had the editor go through it and fix it and uploaded a new manuscript, which is a beautiful thing about publishing with Kindle, is you can upload a new manuscript and fix things. Unlike traditionally publishing, you're kind of stuck with now granted, traditional publishers would not have had it out in the public purview without having an editor anyway, but that's beside the point anyway. So, yes.
And that's good too. Obviously, you've got a very good work ethic too, in the sense that you took those reviews as constructive criticism. I know a lot of people would have read that, and I was very much the same. Like, I had a lot of, I didn't have the greatest editor initially. I actually have a bit of a traumatic story with my first editor, but and I was only, when I published my first, I was 19, 20, so I took it personally, and I know a lot of authors who do, and they still do to this day. And I think you get to a point too where you realize not to take it personally, because everyone's opinion is different, but if it is constructive criticism, don't take it personally. You're just growing as a writer. So say thank you, opposed to they're judging me personally, they're attacking me. No, they've taken time out to give you an honest opinion on that, and that's invaluable.
When I first started, obviously nobody knew who I was, and so it was hard to get reviews, right? But what I would say is, since I now have a set of people who regularly read my things, I now have beta readers, and so as opposed to ARC readers. So beta readers are there to give constructive feedback about plot and, you know, stuff that doesn't quite work for them. And case in point, the second book in my current series, I sent over to beta readers, and there were a couple that came back with this story about, like, I won't go into the details, but I'm like, how in the world did you get that out of what I wrote? But what I always do is I always take their feedback very seriously, and because I'm like, they're not alone. They're not unique. I guarantee if I don't change something, who knows however many other people are going to have the same issue, right? And so what I did was, and most of the time, it could be a one-sentence tweak that makes the difference, right? It happened to be in this case that I wrote a half a chapter and added it, and then added like 2 other sentences. And based on that, they were like, oh, perfect. Okay, I get it now. This is perfect. And now they're like, it goes from like a 4-star review to a 5-star review just because I wrote another half a chapter. It's like 700 words.
Yep.
And it makes the whole difference. I'm like, okay, that worked.
I want to talk about independently published, more specifically Woodgate Press, or Woodgate Publishing, sorry, which is your publishing house. I want to know what led you, because some people either choose to publish directly through Amazon, not associating it in any way with their own business, or other people, whether they acquire a logo or, you know, attach it. For example, mine is Crystal Publishing. What was your decisions as to why you wanted to create that publishing house, but also yours is open and available to people submitting?
Well, no, it's not really.
Okay.
So Woodgate Publishing, a lot of times you look a lot bigger if you have a publishing name out there. And so Woodgate happens to be my maiden name. Okay. So I use Woodgate Publishing purely as it makes my identity, what do I say? It just makes you look a little more credible.
I want to talk about the lead up to success, because success looks very different to everyone, but I think it's something that authors put a lot of pressure on themselves because they have certain goals and they don't know how to climb to it, or they're not patient enough to do the small steps to get there. And I noticed that you are a USA Today bestselling author. Yes. And for a lot of authors, well, congratulations firstly, that's huge.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is the shining star for a lot of authors. That is what they're aiming for. They're wanting that recognition, that, you know, just to say you've made it, this is where you're at. I want to know what that experience was for you and what you thought the lead-up steps were that you did correctly to get there, and how did you celebrate?
Okay, so actually, it's only October 6th that this accolade I can now add to my book covers. So, like, we're talking only, what is it, month and a half.
It's still fresh.
Oh, it's really fresh. Yes. I'll never forget going through all of my book covers and changing and adding that. I'm like, oh, there are certain downsides to that, but I'm like, no, it's a happy task. We'll do this. Anyway, so what I did was I went in with a bunch of other authors, 19 others, so there was 20 of us, and we put together a box set of what's called twisted fairy tale retellings. So twisted being not weird, but twisted as in, so for instance, my Sandmaiden series, it's a takeoff, it's a mashup of Morpheus and the Sandman, okay? And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a fairy tale retelling that can segue into that series. And so what I did was I did a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but the female finds a sleeping prince and has to figure out how to wake him. But it all factors in. I put it in the same world as my Sandmaiden series. And so what we did was we started in January and did pre-orders, got pre-orders all the way up until October 6th, right? And then when it launched, we hit spot 68 on the list, which for a box set like that is like unheard of. But we cranked. The authors in that set are just amazing. Like,
so excited for you. It's so fresh.
So how did we celebrate? Yeah. So basically, there was a lot of celebrating online, right? And my poor husband, so I was really excited about all this, but unfortunately he's busy working in the company all day, right? So he's kind of like, yeah, I got it. So, he and I, we had champagne and stuff, right? But, I felt like my celebration was more meaningful with the group of authors that we did it with. And because the really funny thing, so it was all coordinated based on a Facebook group. And so the funny thing was, it was all a week long. Your sales you have to accumulate for a week. And so, but then they didn't report it right away. It's like, then you have to wait until Wednesday. It's based on Monday to Monday, but then you don't find out until Wednesday. And so everybody's refresh. It's like, is it done yet? Is it up yet? No. So the first person to finally say, we hit 68. It's like, whoa. Yes, it was really funny.
I want to talk about beautiful book covers because I have fallen in love with your cover to Lullaby and Empire of Ash, and the reason for that is I am your target audience. Those are books that I will look at. I saw Lullaby, I saw Lullaby, and immediately I thought of Sarah J. Maas, and I wasn't surprised when you had written, if you love Sarah J. Maas, and I was like, yes, I love Sarah J. Maas, I'm going to love this book. But the same with Empire of Ash, and I think it's so important for people to understand what they're actually presenting on their cover and being very clear to the market and target audience that they're aiming for. So what advice would you offer to fellow writers or even readers maybe who want to become writers? What advice would you offer to them to ensure that they're maintaining those elements so they are being very specific as to who they're trying to reach on their covers? Yeah,
so first, before I get into that, the other thing, Lullaby was actually done by a woman named Charlie Bowater.
Okay.
Charlie Bowater is the artist who has contributed to a lot of Sarah J. Maas's covers.
I'm so jealous of you.
Well, I hired her specifically for that series because one, it was the first book in that brand new series into a brand new market for me. And so what I did was I purposely hired her to do it because I needed to, if you will, piggyback off of her reputation as being Sarah J. Maas's artist. Everybody loves Charlie Bowater. Anybody who is a fanatic about Sarah J. Maas knows Charlie Bowater. It was going to link into the target market that I was after, right? In terms of the fundamentals of a specific cover, what I would say is I'm the wrong person to ask about that because all I would say is you need to hire a really good cover designer. And how you go about finding that is to look online. Go to Amazon. You need to know who your target market is, right? But once you figured that out, then look on the bestseller lists and see what do the covers look like. What are the general elements? Is there one person? Is this person, do they have a sword? Do they have magic depicted? Is it typically a female? What's in the background? Those kinds of elements, and get a general sense. Because a lot of times you can figure out who did the cover. A lot of times there's credits inside the book somewhere. You can actually figure out who the artist is, and then just reach out to the artist. Now, I mean, you may end up getting declined a few times, but no big deal. It's like you'll eventually find one. The one for the current series, the God of Secrets series, is somebody that was referred to me, you know, recommended. So, and I'm loving the covers she's doing, right? And got one more to go.
I love that. All of those key factors are perfect. One, if you love a particular author's cover, then try and source who the cover artist is.
Mm-hmm.
I recently did a revamp on a couple of my covers, and one of my favorite authors is Lee Bardugo. And I I asked the question, I asked fellow authors, I want to change my covers. It's been 5 years. Market has changed. I need to spice them up a little bit. And so a good friend of mine was offering suggestions, and I loved particular covers, but some of them there was no emotional connection for me. And then I came across Adriana as my current cover artist, and she lives in Europe. And I was like, wow, I love those covers. And then I scrolled through and saw that she had done one of the, I think it was European edition covers of Lee Bardugo's Six of Kingdom. I was like, really? And she done a poster for Aquaman, and I was like, you know, and the thing too is you have to remain within your budget. I increased my budget for this specific cover artist because it was part of the target. And the thing is too is don't be afraid when it comes to cover artists. This is one thing I had to overcome, was if you don't like where something is going, or if you don't like certain elements, be honest with them. I know I have, like, you know, I'll send her a whole pile of things where, like, I'm inspired by Sarah J. Maas. I love these covers, but I also love the elements of this in this book, and I really enjoy the font on this one. And then she'll throw a couple of things together, and I'll go, oof, no, that's not.
Well,
that's
quite
not
how I expected it, yeah.
Look, I take it back. I'm so sorry. I take it back. But you're creating something magical. You want to be happy, especially when you are paying a higher price. It doesn't matter how much you're paying. You want to be happy with your cover, and you want to feel emotionally connected to it. But do remember to put in elements that are accurate to your story, because I do know that some people get really beautiful covers, and I read the book and think, I don't understand what this certain thing had to do on the cover because it had no mention. So I think that's important too. But I'm so jealous of you. That's why I love your cover now. I'm so jealous. One thing that authors absolutely hate, I don't mind it, I love the challenge, is marketing. What would be your 3 top tips for marketing?
Well, first, I have to say, marketing is by far the biggest area that I struggle with.
Yeah.
The first would be a lesson that I learned on my first series. What I didn't realize in writing middle grade young adult is that for an indie published author, Scholastic in the US pretty much has that locked up in terms of that group. So for instance, as an indie author, typically my target is kids like 8 to 12, that range in there, at least for that first series. And where do they get their books usually? Well, it's usually a school library, or here, at least with Scholastic, they have these Scholastic, I've forgotten what they're called. Basically, Scholastic sends these order forms to schools, right? And so they pretty much have the school age market locked up. And so what I was surprised with is by the time a child that age gets to be that age, the parent is no longer, unlike when they're little, they're kind of like, go find a book in the library and read it, as opposed to really inserting themselves in the process. And so what I was really surprised in is, for my first series, there's an awful lot of adults and actually even grandparents that read it first. And then they come back and they say, you know, my grandkids would really enjoy this, right? And so that's kind of how the sale gets made. But it's not the kid initiating it. They're not on Amazon, because 13 is where the kid is allowed online independently, right? So, I mean, it's like my target group, the kids themselves, aren't even online, right? It's like, so I have to target their parents, but unfortunately, when you're targeting a parent of a school-age kid, they're usually looking for their own reading material, not necessarily reading material for Johnny, right? Now, when COVID came through, this was interesting, and all the schools got locked down. There was a huge boom in my sales. Wow. Just because the schools were closed and parents still knew their kids needed to read. And so they went out to Amazon and they bought a whole bunch of books, right? That was the middle grade young adult. That same thing didn't really happen. It didn't translate to more my new adult or adult, that type of thing, because people typically, shop the way they shop. And COVID didn't really have anything to change in terms of buying habits, if you will. So the thing I would say is, what I didn't realize going into writing that first series is that middle grade young adult, there's a lot of hurdles. A lot more hurdles trying to write for that age than there are upstream, which is why after I wrote 7 books, so I was faithful to my readers. I finished the series, right? But after that, I migrated upstream. And there's a whole lot more fish that I can talk directly to up here than there ever will be down there because of the situation. So from a marketing perspective, the reason I say all that is this. It depends on what your ambition is when you're writing. If it's just to, for the sake of writing and sharing, a story, it doesn't, that's irrelevant. But if your goal is, it's like, I'd like to be a 5-figure author. I'd like to be a 6-figure author. I'd like to be a whatever author. The genre that you write for and the target market absolutely has to be included in that thinking, and it needs to make sense before you ever write the first word. So that would be marketing tip number 1. Personal experience speaking here, right?
Oh my goodness, let that be light.
Yes, this is called, it's what, 5:30 here. Yeah, it's like, wow, it's getting dark out there. Okay, all right, so that would be number 1. Number 2, reviews absolutely matter. So I know there's the chicken and the egg problem. It's like, well, how do I get a review if how do I get reviews if nobody's going to read the book? And how do I get somebody to read the book if there's no reviews, kind of a thing? Anyway, there's no perfect solution. One thing that is a great tool that I've found to be fairly effective is a place called Booksprout. They typically have, you can post your manuscript in there and ask, people will sign up. They have a whole base of readers, and their readers tend to give you the most reviews of any of the services I've used. So that would be tip 2. The third thing I would say is, especially as an indie author, writing in series is the best way to go. And that's because one series or one book builds to the next book, builds to the next book from a sell-through perspective, if that makes sense. So for instance, typically I have the first book in the series at either free or 99 cents. And after that, then there's a certain rate of sell-through, right? And with that, the other thing I would say is I would not bother spending a penny on marketing book 1 until book 2 is also available, because you can't get any momentum going, if that makes sense. It's like once you get the reader through book 1, then there's a book 2 that you can actually make some money on to offset the advertising costs. And obviously, the longer the series, the more profitable it can be.
Was one of the questions I actually wanted to ask you was, I find that you have 2 forms of, people sit on the fence with this one, is with the first book in a series, either offering it for 99 cents or free. And I know that some people are on the fence and they say, but if I do it any less, I'm going to look undervalued. But then there are other ones who, the opposing side, who are like, yes, but this is no risk for the reader. They're going to download it, read it, and if they do love it, then they're going to purchase on the other ones. So I love that that is a tactic that you use, and that tactic works for you. Another thing I did notice was your readers' favorite stickers. I love readers' favorite. And so I was just curious as to what are some of the things that you think have offered in your career time credibility to your work that you think was important, or even some things that you had tried that you felt fell a bit flat for you personally, and so you haven't continued on with that tactic?
You've seen probably a lot of those stickers on several of my books, because what I do find, and I was careful not to have the same sticker on every single book, right? I mean, but I think in general, people who are wanting to read a book, there is something, I mean, we are conditioned to see those little seals on, you know, kids' books or whatever, is like it's won the Newbery Prize, you know, whatever. And so just from a marketing perspective, there's a lot of places that you can submit to, Reader's Favorite, one of them. And basically it's just, they give it a review, right? They review it. And if it's a 5-star review, they give the, you know, this seal. And if it's a 4-star, they give it that seal. But bottom line is you can get these little markers to give you more credibility, right? I would say the biggest thing back to reviews is reviews count. Reviews matter from a credibility perspective, right? That first book that I ever wrote, as of this week now, has 410 reviews on Amazon alone. And I mean, it's widely distributed. And like Google Play and some of those others, their readers tend to be a lot more giving in terms of ratings. So it's like, it's got like 600 reviews over on Google Play. You know, it's like, it's got like this 1,000 thing out there, right? As opposed to Amazon, which they tend to be a little stingy with those. It's the readers. It's not Amazon. It's like they're posting all the stuff that the readers give it, but I don't know. So anyway, but yeah, I would say reviews make the biggest difference.
I want to know what has been your greatest challenge and what has been your greatest accomplishment in your writing career.
So I would say the greatest challenge, marketing, scaling, right? It truly is, like I said before, just because it's, I don't know, there are some people who just get marketing. It's like how to phrase things or whatever it is, or even like the running Facebook ads or Amazon ads, that's just not my gift. And so I would say scaling has definitely been my greatest challenge. I'm a 5-figure author. I want to be a 6-figure author, right? And so it's like when you don't effectively know how to scale, it's a big challenge, right? So, you know, I'm getting better, but I'm not going to say I've cracked it by any means. Yeah. So, yeah. So, and in terms of the greatest accomplishment, I would have to say, so my Sandmaiden series, for me, has been the most fulfilling thus far. And the reason I say that is this, because through that series, there is a theme of, so overcoming, so you're familiar with #MeToo.
Yes.
So there's a theme running through that series of overcoming or empowering people who have been Me Too. I mean, now what that means is like the first book, there's a sexual assault. So it starts in a really dark place, but you kind of have to start there in order, so like trigger warning, but you kind of have to start there in order to, you know, how's the protagonist going to have to cope with this and figure out how to deal with it throughout 4 books if you don't have that as a thing to begin with, right? So it's kind of starts in a dark place, but then it's truly is, it's like, this is the character figuring out how to process it, how to cope with it, especially since she and the person that did the deed are like, so like the guy who approved of the deed is her lover's brother. So it's like he's around, right? Yeah. And so then how do you learn how to cope with this person around, right? She never forgives him, and I think in general that's true, you know. So, but there's those themes that run throughout that series, and so what was most meaningful for me was as new books were being released, different women would contact me, and they would say, "I thought I had processed through this, And halfway through this book, I was sobbing because, you know, like they realized that they had not yet effectively figured out how to cope with it. You know, it was like, it was kind of like in the background, but the monkey was still there and they thought it was gone. And it's like, it brought it out and they were like, and now based upon how she's learning how to cope with it, it's helping me better cope with it, kind of thing. So, I mean, that was just like, you know, I mean, that was so cool to hear that, right? So.
That's so rewarding. That
Yes.
Knowing that not only have you stayed true to the character and executed her thought process accurately, but to the point where it's helping others heal. And I have no doubt that was your initial intention writing that book. So congratulations, because I think as writers, that is our responsibility to connect with them, and being able to heal is like such a massive thing. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and this current series, God of Secrets, the theme that goes through there is more self-image. Yeah. So especially a lot of women have self-image issues. Yes. So the protagonist is learning how to cope with that.
One thing we actually didn't mention before, and I do like to bring it up now and then, is theme, because I think a lot of people can lose their way when writing if they don't have a very specific theme that they're going with. And often, you know, as you're learning about your character and building into it, the theme may change only slightly to, obviously, you know, they're an element as well in it. But having a strong theme consistently through a book and a series is what's going to thread it. You have a message and you need to make sure that you're staying consistent with it. And that is basically your theme.
Yeah. Yeah. Although you don't want to beat readers over the head with it, right?
No, it has to be, I always call it, it's not a subliminal message. You're not being sneaky about it, right. But it needs to be subtle, and I always love it when readers don't even realize that is what you're sort of putting into it until at the end, and they're like, my goodness, I can't believe like she went through that and this is how she processed, and they're like, oh, because they found relevance to it in some way. That's why they keep reading.
Exactly.
What are you currently working on?
So I am brainstorming the last book in the God of Secrets. So this one we start in Greece. We go to the Empire of Secrets, then we go to the Empire of Glass, which is the polar opposite. It's like salt and pepper, transparency versus secrets, right? And then I'm not going to say where we go, but it's called Empire of Darkness is the last book. So yes, I'm brainstorming currently.
Oh, I'm excited. All right. What is I love asking this question. This is my final question. What is the largest goal for you? What is the dream that you are chasing as an author?
I would say it goes back to what I said before. Right now I'm a 5-figure author, and I would really like to be a 6-figure author. 2021,
here we go.
I don't know if I'll make it that soon, but yeah.
I believe. I'll be on we're best friends now, so I'll be on your back and be like, have you got that paycheck yet? You're not working hard enough. No, I'm kidding. I have a couple of rapid fire questions at the end. Sure. So first one is, what's your favorite animal and why?
I would say it's either a panda or a sloth. Pandas because when I was 7, I got as a birthday present a little stuffed panda bear, Peter. So, and he actually he's a writing buddy. He sits on my writing shelf. I still have him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so panda bears, that or sloths. I've come to love sloths these days too. They're just very cute.
Are you a Marvel or a DC person, and what character would you be?
I'm Marvel, and Iron Man would be mine. Tony Stark. Yes.
We're soul sisters. I didn't know. What song best describes you?
That's a good one. Music and it's like I love listening to piano and strings music. But I don't really listen to music with words. So I don't know how to answer that one. So, I mean, especially when I'm writing, what do I say? If I'm listening to music with words and trying to write, I'm not writing anything because my brain is there and not here, right? So I don't know how to answer that one.
So would you say like more piano, jazz?
I would say more piano, absolutely. Classical, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know any other languages, and if so, what?
Je parle français un peu.
Oh, oui.
Ah, très bien.
Je m'appelle Kaya.
Ah, je m'appelle Lisette. Yeah.
Ah, well, look at that. That's all I know. Do you know all of the...
No.
I'm so impressed.
I took French for 7 years, like in school, and so and went over to France 2 years ago, and so had a major. It was like, wow, I remember this. Oh, that's how you say that. It was actually pretty funny.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
I'm neither. I hate to say this. I vowed when my parents would go to bed at 10 at night, I used to laugh at them. Well, here go I, and I am so not a morning person. I'm like, give me I need coffee, please. So no, I'm neither. I'm just like.
I have had an absolute blast talking with you today.
This has been fun, yes.
Yeah, it has. Okay, so tell us what's upcoming. Where do we find you? What do we need to know about you? Tell me more. I love you already.
I love you too.
I love you. So you get me excited.
So you can find me at lrwlee.com. That's my pen name. Just because when I tried to get a domain name, do you know how many Linda Lees there are in this world?
Oh.
I in fact, true story, I was on a plane chatting with the woman next to me. We traded business cards at the end. Her name was Linda Lee. And I burst out laughing. I'm like, no way. It's like, so yes, there are a lot of Linda Lees in this world. So when I tried to get my domain name, ain't happening with Linda Lee. And I even tried Linda W. Lee, and that was taken. So I took the Tolkien route and went LRW Lee and finally found one. So hence why it is what it is. LRWLee.com, or like on Amazon, or most of the places. So you can find me there. So
amazing.
And then in terms of what's coming up next, I release Empire of Glass on December 17th. So that's book 3 in the current series. And then, like I said, I'm brainstorming book 4. So we'll see how fast that gets done. So that's like I would think probably March, April next year sometime I'll release that.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I have had such a good time, and hopefully I can get you on in the next couple of months again, if you so desire to come back. I'd love to see you again.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.